Thank you to our sponsors, Little Voices. Are you a teacher with a passion for drama, music and performance, or feeling stuck in the classroom? Little Voices gives you the chance to step into a role where you can truly inspire young minds through the arts. This is a company I know well and admire. They're passionate about child development, highly rated and genuine and transformative. With small group teaching, a focus on confidence and creativity, with the opportunity to guide children through Lambda qualifications, you can make a real impact. Plus, with the support of a nationwide franchise network behind you, you can run your own successful business, doing what you love while teaching in a way that truly fits your life. Hello, and welcome to the Pit Pony Podcast with myself, Sharon Corley,
and me, Sarah Dunwood,
in which we talk to teachers from all walks of life who exited the classroom from what they thought was a job for life and thrived on the other side of teaching. Coming up in this episode...
And then my kids were going to breakfast club and after school club, and I just thought, for what? Like, what am I doing this for? And I keep coming back to, it's all right when it's working and you're getting your boost and your sense of worth and your sense of well-being from work. But then there's always that saying, isn't there, that you are completely replaceable at work.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to yet another episode of the Pit Pony Podcast, in which we speak to teachers who have exited the classroom and thrived on the other side. And today we have Giselle Wild with us. So, Giselle only left Christmas 2024, so she's recently out of the classroom. 17 years doing the job she loved and was born to do. Now, Giselle's stock in trade is as an art teacher. She went arts teacher, assistant head of year, head of art. So she was working her way through, but yet exits the classroom a couple of months ago. So, Giselle, welcome. And can you tell us what it is you're doing today, please?
Oh, thanks so much for having me. So do you mean today what I've been doing in general?
No, artist, what's your job title today? As much as our listeners might be interested in you pegging your washing out because it's been glorious sunshine, we'll stick with your job title, love, all right?
You know what? I'll tell you now, that is one of my favourite bits of partly working from home is how quickly washing dries. I'm getting through loads and loads and loads. But so at the moment, I'm currently my official title is a project coordinator for the Breck Foundation.
Fabulous. Can't wait to get into that. Cannot wait to unpick all about that amazing organisation. But how we start is how we start. You exited at Christmas. What were the circumstances surrounding the decision to leave the job you loved?
I mean, it depends kind of how far back you want me to go, really. I think I'm quite an unusual case, probably, in the sense that it's quite a long story and really 85% of my career in teaching has been really, really positive. But I'm also I'm quite a spontaneous person. As a family, we make decisions quite quickly. And when something doesn't quite feel right, we do something about it really quickly. So it's a really great career in teaching and then a very clear crisis point, I suppose you'd call it, which happened sort of over the summer and then ended in me exiting at Christmas, like you say. So, I mean, I can take you through from the beginning and that'll give you kind of different reference points. I think it will seem like I'm almost meant to still be in the classroom and until we get to the point where things really change. So yeah, if you're happy to bear with me, I'll talk you through from the beginning. I'd love to do that.
I think it's important because every story has similarities, but they're unique stories at the same time. And that's what this space is about, with storytelling. So tell us your story.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So, I mean, I'm definitely a classic case of somebody who was born to be a teacher, you know, and I used to line up my dolls and take the register from a very young age. And so I was born in France and we moved to England when I was in year 6. And even then, so I was bilingual in French and English. And I knew at that point that I wanted to teach French lessons to English kids when I moved over. So my mum helped me out and we ran this class where we were teaching French lessons and I loved it. And that was where it was kind of born, really. So then I went to university and I did an art degree, a fine art degree, with the sole purpose of being an art teacher. So it was never about being an artist. The end goal for me was to teach art because that was the subject that I loved and that was the subject that I believed was just an amazing vehicle for reaching young people, and I was really passionate about it. So that's what I went on to do, and I was really lucky that I got my first job in Newcastle in the northeast, and the head of department was just incredible. She's still a very, very good friend of mine. She's also recently come out of the classroom, and she really nurtured me and she really kind of grew me as a professional, and I learned my trade, and you know, I was really good at it. Like, I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but I was really good at my job, and I just loved it. And then, so I was quite happy working away in the art department and doing what we were doing on a daily basis. And then about 5 years in, because I like to stay where I am. Do you know what I mean? I don't flip from school to school. Once I'm in, I like to be there for a while. So an opportunity came up to be assistant head of year. And I'd always wanted to go down the pastoral route. I thought, you know, my relationship with kids was really strong. And I took that on. And I think that was the first time really that I'd experienced kind of, I don't think I'd call it bullying, but I'd certainly call it unpleasantness in the workplace. So I was in an office with the head of year and the admin lady, and it was just a little bit, I can see now it kind of came from like maybe insecurities and quite complex things that were going on. But ultimately, I felt really unhappy in that space. And I was told that I'd never be ready to be a head of year, and I just wouldn't get that position moving forward. So instead of dwelling on that, I used that as a springboard, and I thought, do you know what? Sod you. I'm going to go and get a head of year job, and I'm going to go and do it. And at the time, I was also in quite an unhealthy relationship that was, not particularly great. And my best friend had moved down to Brighton after uni. And I thought, where's the furthest I can get away from Newcastle? I'll go to Brighton.
But isn't it interesting that in the space of that time, you've talked about people who share the same floor space. You talked about head of department who nurtured you, who taught you your trade, who is still your good friend now, and in the same breath, in the same staff list, because you didn't even allude to who it was, but that's fine, somebody said, you are never going to make a head of year. And it resulted in you leaving. We never, ever understand the impact that colleagues can have on an individual, and not just detrimentally. Sarah talks with such passion about some of the mentors that she had. Isn't it just interesting, Sarah, that same space, same floor space, totally different approach?
To quote a Depeche Mode song, "People are people." You're going to get that, aren't you? And sadly, I think at a really blunt level, some people just do not realize the impact of their words. They just speak. They say what they think. That's something that I don't understand because I'm very measured about how I speak, what I say. It annoys the hell out of people because I pause whilst my brain is thinking, is this okay? Yeah, it absolutely kills you. I know that. But I can't understand people who just go word vomit without any concern for the impact that it might have on somebody.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, I mean, you're so incredibly young when you can start teaching. I had 6 formers at that time, and I was 21 and they were 19, and you're so young and you're so vulnerable, and you've picked this career, which is, a massive commitment, and people should be there to build those foundations and put that scaffolding in place. But I think as well, teaching, as a staff network, you're almost like this weird kind of family, aren't you? That you go through such a roller coaster of emotions. It's not even day to day, it's hour to hour. Everything's so heightened and everything's so emotional that words can really, and I've always taken that on, like I've had a lot of PGCE students that I've mentored, and I've only ever thought they just need building up, because to be really honest, if you've picked this career, that's brave enough. Like, you need all the support you can get.
I mean, technically speaking, a 21-year-old is year 16. If you've got year 12, year 13, a 21-year-old is year 16.
Yeah.
If you're going to look at it like that, you've got a year 13 and a year 16. There's not much difference. But anyway, we've digressed because you're on your way to Brighton.
So I'm on my way to Brighton. So I really took it. And in the past, I think prior to that comment would have really wobbled me and would have really ingrained itself right in my core. And it was the first time that I consciously thought, I'm not going to take that. I'm going to use that to do something else. So I applied for this job down in Brighton, and it was head of year 7, and I've got it. I set off at 4:00 in the morning to drive down for the interview in my little pink Fiat 500. And I pulled up and I got it, and it just, everything just kind of fell into place from there. So I had an amazing 7 years at that school. Probably most importantly, I met my lovely partner, who's now the father of my children. So he was assistant head at the school. He started at the same time as me. He was my line manager for a bit, which I kind of think if you can get through that as a couple for any period of time, then you're doing well. And it was great. And it was a really, really good time of life. And then in 2017, our whole world was flipped upside down. And I think, what I'll tell you is quite personal and it's quite emotive, but it kind of builds those foundations for understanding what teaching has meant to me, and therefore what a massive decision it was to exit, because it kind of illustrates what a massive part of my life teaching has played. So in 2017 we found out that we were pregnant. It was brilliant. We were so excited. I had a really healthy pregnancy. I had the pregnancy glow, like my hair was growing and my nails were strong, and I loved it. And I had no reason to believe that anything other than an amazing thing was about to happen. And then we tried to have a home birth, and because we did 36 hours of labour at home, and we kind of weren't checked on enough, and there was a few mistakes that were made. And my little boy, my eldest, was so he got stuck. So his head was out and his body was in, and he didn't take a breath for 19 minutes, so they kind of stop the resuscitation process at 20 minutes, usually because the quality of life will be so compromised. And, it was a really, really serious thing that just came totally out of the blue and completely knocked us for six. And again, the school was just amazing. Obviously, we both worked there. I was off on maternity leave, and the head teacher was amazing. He was so supportive with Adrian being off during that time to support me. And again, I kind of just cracked on with it. And I think looking back, I mean, I went back to work full-time head of year when Frankie was 6 months old, which, considering what had happened, was pretty soon. It was pretty quick. And the reason for that is because at the time, teaching was my whole identity. And if I'm really honest, it felt like if I'm back at work and I'm putting makeup on and I'm getting dressed for the day and I'm functioning, then actually I can forget about this massive responsibility that's going on. And, we didn't know what the future would hold. Luckily, he's so well, and he runs and he walks, and we were told he'd be tube fed for life and he'd be in a wheelchair, and he's none of those things, and he's an absolute miracle. But at the time, what I needed was to get back to work, right? Which is a really weird thing. But that tells you how much teaching was just a part of me.
Can I just say, Giselle, at that point, on behalf of myself, Sarah, and the listeners, I couldn't exhale myself until you told us the outcome of what had happened. And you went, he didn't breathe for 20 minutes. And then you continued the story. And I'm thinking, and what's happened? So
I'm so sorry.
No, I'm so invested in what you were saying. And I'm just like, and the outcome is so Frankie is the best you could have ever hoped for.
Yeah, he honestly, and I'll tell you, I'm conscious of, I don't want to drone on and I don't want to kind of divert from what we're here for, but he really is an absolute miracle. And the reason that he's so well, we think, is because at the time Brighton Hospital was trialling a brand new treatment, which is a cooling mattress. So they'd realised that in colder countries like Norway and stuff, the extent of brain damage was actually stemmed because of the dropping temperature. So Brighton Hospital had one cooling mattress that happened to be on the level below where we were. And once he was out, he was on that mattress within less than 3 minutes. So we think that's why he's so well. But yeah, he's an absolute miracle, and we're very, very blessed.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We can, to a certain extent, take a sigh of relief there.
You can.
You went back 6 months, very supportive school. You needed normalcy. School provided that for you. So it's serving you, your passion, your job, your vocation. So you go back after 6 months.
So I go back after 6 months, and as far as I'm aware, I'm coping really well. I'm doing what I've always done. I'm doing it really well. I'm back in the swing of things. Everything's ticking along, and then we got pregnant with our second little boy, Dexter, who was 2 years younger than Frankie. And again, everything was okay. Everything went really smoothly with the birth, and he's a healthy, happy boy. And then what can sometimes happen is that if you've had a really traumatic first birth, the second birth can then trigger what's called delayed onset PTSD. So that hit me out of absolutely nowhere when Dexter was about 1. I can't explain why. I don't know where it came from, but it happened. And it happened 3 weeks before the very first lockdown. So if you remember, we had no idea really what was coming. It really did come out of the blue. And it just happened that 3 weeks before that first lockdown, I, for the first time in my whole career, had to be signed off work things had really taken a turn for the worst. And I was signed off for 3 weeks, ironically. And then when I was due to return, it was lockdown was announced. So I never really went back until, I think it was the September, wasn't it, when we kind of started to get back to a little bit of normality from what I remember. So I then, again, we were still at the same school, although Adrian, my partner, had moved on at that point. So he'd got a deputy headship somewhere else. So it had shifted a little bit in that I didn't have my kind of security blanket there anymore. And I was having some kind of, flashbacks in the staff toilets. And it just felt like it was, not quite the safe space that it had been previously. So I dropped down to just teaching. And I say that in inverted commas because actually teaching 5 days a week compared to being head of year, which is incredibly intense, but you can escape to your office. I didn't have that when I was teaching full-time 5 days. And so I thought it'd be a bit of a step down and a bit of a step back, but it wasn't. And that's when kind of the cogs start turning that I think, when you've got your own kids and the demands on pastoral staff are insane. I mean, it's so responsive and it's so all-consuming that I just couldn't do it when I had my own 2 kids, and I did a huge amount of work with a counsellor and I got better and I developed a really wide range of strategies to deal with what had happened to me and it was fine. But actually that pastoral role was kind of done for me. So it's funny when you're kind of describing it all and you realise how everything just has fallen into place. It's a really funny thing to reflect on. But so we then decided to move house because, as I said at the beginning, we're quite spontaneous like that and we will just decide that we want to do something like that. So we bought a house which was more central Brighton and it was about half an hour commute from where we were. And I was just going to keep commuting because I was fairly happy and it's what I'd done for the last 6-7 years, whatever. And then the day the offer got accepted on the new house, a head of art role came up at the local secondary school, which is a 3-minute walk from the new house. And head of art roles never come up on the South Coast. Like, if you get a head of art role, people tend to stay. So the lady before me had been there for 26 years. That kind of tells you what I was stepping into. It was amazing. And again, I had a really amazing 4 years and I bloody loved that school. I really did. But, it was a tough ride. Like, I think being head of a curriculum area is very different to a pastoral lead. I think you can manage your time more effectively, but it is still just all consuming. And we didn't have an easy time. We had a member of the team who was very, very poorly beyond any kind of support that we could put in place. But we did really well, again, I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but we had the best results in the school for 3 years running and we turned the department around and it was ace. Loved it, felt really proud of what we'd achieved, but it wasn't easy. And so when that member of staff was off, I was basically doing lots of jobs at once, but I was writing cover lessons for her every week. I was dealing with cover teachers and I was trying to do my job. And but do you know what? What I always say is it was fine because it was paying off. So at the time, it was like, oh, go and see Giselle for how you nurture independence and creativity. Go and see the art department. They're amazing. And all those things that are eating everything that you've got was all right because it was paying off and it was working. So that's where we kind of got to. And then now we're getting quite close to the turning point. So I don't know if you want to jump in.
I mean, I can't wait for the turning point, I'll tell you that now. But there's a couple of things for me. I was head of year.
Yeah.
I was head of year and an English teacher. And I used to say they are two completely different full-time jobs. There isn't a crossover. There isn't a cutting of a corner that's going to serve me as a head of department and as an English teacher. They were two completely separate full-time jobs. And personally, when I got the head of year's role, I was whisked in on because I think I got it in the May, and in my first week in post in June, the line manager went, right, what don't you know? There was no induction. There was no training. I found I was catapulted into this world with very, very little grounding that I needed to do a role that involved some of the most extreme safeguarding concerns, dealing with social services, dealing with agencies that I had to look up before I even knew what they stood for, let alone what they did. So I felt out of my depth in many ways. Passed up, brilliant with kids, marched me down a corridor with a walkie-talkie. What you doing stood out here? Do you want me to phone your mother? Perfect at that. But there was this world that sat away from me. And then absolutely no consideration given. I think I got 2 frees or something like that to do this job. It was crazy. I mean, I'm talking 2006 to 2012 kind of thing. So there was that. And then what you also touched on is the setting of this cover work. I am hoping that in today's day and age, ChatGPT and AI is doing the heavy lifting for teachers in that respect. I don't know. Me and Sarah have been out too long to know if that is the case or not. But setting cover work, there's got to be a better way than that. What do you think, Sarah?
Setting cover work, complete side issue. Separate issue, not side issue. That diminishes it. It's interesting that you and I have got very different experiences, because I was head of year. I came back off maternity leave into a head of year's role that was new in a nice middle class leafy suburban school with 1,200 kids on the roll, and it was a lovely school, year groups of 240. And I was also a head of department as well. There were no TLRs at that point. You were on it was MPS plus whatever. Do you remember the old point scale? So actually people did have multiple management roles. So I had a middle leaders role subject and a middle leaders role head of year. And you had 2 frees. I was given 5 non-contacts for head of year and another couple for subject. So I was all right, to be fair. But I completely recognise what you said, Giselle, that yes, it was all consuming, but there was an element of that head of year role where actually I could go into my office and do head of year stuff for a bit. There was a bolt hole as such. And I think for me, what I'm reflecting on is what I know now about how the role is for people in schools now, and over the last few years, the last decade. Head of year roles that I've seen and line manage people with and stuff as a senior leader bear no resemblance to the head of year role that I did from 2000 to 2003. No resemblance at all. And so that's why I'm being a bit guarded about commenting, because my experience is the glory days of it. It was idyllic. As for cover work, there has to be a better solution. But then it comes to you as a head of department. You said something. It's all right when it's all consuming if it's all paying off. So, of course, as a head of department in a department that you've turned around, that is thriving, that you want the kids to do well, and not that anybody doesn't want the kids to do well. But, of course, you're going to set the cover work because you want the kids who are being covered to have the...
Yeah, and that's what I was just going to say. You know, I really, because it was a completely new role for me, And I don't know if it's something to do with it being the local school, and my kids' school's attached to the high school as well. And I just felt like it was my baby. And I guess I kind of took on a real element of wanting to control everything as well. So I'm sure there was more effective ways of doing it, but I wanted to know that those kids they weren't just getting a plug the gap.
Well, that's the trap, isn't it?
Through the trap. And I think there's really interesting kind of sort of a side of shoe, but sort of not. When I saw the head of art role advertised, I phoned the school because it was a full-time role, and I wanted to work 4 days a week. And I phoned them and I said, would you consider, before I, go through the trouble of applying or whatever, would you consider appointing a 0.8 head of department? And they said yes. And when people had asked me about that later on, because that set a precedent in school, you see. So I was the first member of middle management that was part-time. And my first reaction was always, oh, I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful that as a mum, I can work part-time but still have a leadership role. And actually, on reflection, it's just not the case. Like, firstly, we shouldn't feel, this is a complete sidetrack, but I feel really passionate about it. Why should we feel grateful that we're doing, because actually also there's nobody else doing that 0.2 of that job. There's no one else taking on that 20%. And we did actually eventually change that, and we did get the boundaries shifted on that. But initially I was going, I'm so grateful that I can fit 5 days working for 4 days pay, because I'm a woman and a mum who has been granted this opportunity to work part-time. But as I say, eventually that did change, and the boundaries shifted with that, and that was really pleasing. But yeah, just a side rant there that I
No, we're ready to work. Yeah, I feel grateful I'm being shafted. Brief interlude, dear listener. Couple of questions. Are you a tutor or even a pit pony considering tutoring? And do you fancy getting in the room with myself and Sarah Dunwood, learning about the wonderful world of tuition? Then why not join us at the National Tutors Conference, hosted by Connexus Tuition, on the 29th of July 2025. It's at Chesford Grange, Kenilworth. Links to the tickets are in the show notes below, and we will both see you on the other side. So, we've come to that point. We've come to that point where you've talked us through, and then you've said, and then it started to change. What happened, Giselle?
We have. So it was a really clear moment for me. And again, I keep coming back to it, but this is my personality, that I'm very decisive. I'm very, sporadic in a way, and I go with my gut, basically. And so, we were surviving and we were all right, but we were stretched at home, and my partner had moved up again to head of school by that point. And the boys were going to breakfast club at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was picking them up at 6 o'clock at night. And obviously Frankie has, some additional needs to deal with, and Dexter is a 5-year-old. And it was, we were coping, but we were stretched. And then, so I don't know if you know much about how kind of art assessment happens at GCSE, but you have a cohort, and you mark everything in-house. So we had 45 kids doing the art GCSE, and we had 45 kids doing the photography GCSE. So you mark each kid's coursework and each kid's exam project in-house. So there's only 2 of us full members of the department. So we did all of that. And I'm just thinking now, and I'm breathing a sigh of relief, even as we're speaking, because this is the period of time when this all happens. So this is kind of a year ago, I suppose. So then the exam board request a sample of 12 kids. regardless of how many you've got generally, right? So we got our sample requested, and I still to this day, I do not genuinely understand what happened. I don't know if there was some sort of agenda to get things back to pre-COVID. I don't know. But what I do know is that we didn't change anything. So from the formula and all the stuff that I introduced in my first year as the head of department to get in to massively increasing results, best results in the school. Every kid in the class was doing something different. So we had none of this, 25 portraits of Picasso. It wasn't like that. The kids were working as independent, interesting, exciting artists. You can tell how passionate I feel, can't you, in my voice? And we didn't change anything. We did everything. We marked as rigorously as we always had done. And we were fair and we felt that we were being honest. And they looked at the sample and they said, we're going to pull, because what happens is if they disagree with one grade from the sample, they will then pull down the whole cohort, so 90 kids. So they said, we're going to pull down the whole cohort by not one, but 2 grades. So all my grade 5s were 3s. All my grade 7s were 5s. And we appealed it. We fought for it. We had the community behind, everybody was outraged because there was no, anyway, it's a separate issue, but that's what happened. And we appealed it and they rejected the appeal and we got lots of advice and it just didn't go anywhere. And, I had kids banging at the door who couldn't get into college because they hadn't got their grade and art was their passion and they'd come out with a 4 rather than a 6 and it was just horrendous. And I went through a member of staff who was really, really well respected and I'd been asked to run numerous CPD sessions and mentor other heads of department and all of that stuff it was weird because overnight I went to somebody that I felt, and they probably weren't, but that I felt people were looking at in the corridor and going, oh, you need support. Like you need a bit of help. Why don't you go to the school next door and have a look at how they do it? And I was thinking, but I know what I'm doing. Like I'm not perfect, but I know what I'm doing. And I've never had a single mark lowered in my whole 17-year career. So how has this happened? And I don't know. And then my kids were going to breakfast club and after school club. And I just thought, for what? Like, what am I doing this for? And I keep coming back to it's all right when it's working and you're getting your boost and your sense of worth and your sense of well-being from work. But then there's always that saying, isn't there, that you are completely replaceable at work. However good you are, people have been in schools for 25 years and everyone thinks, oh my God, what we're going to do when they leave. And then everyone's forgotten by the next year. And I just had a real moment of clarity. So that was in September where I was like, what am I doing this for? If someone can just come along and whip the rug out from under my feet. So that was when it started.
It's interesting reflecting on who you've become, because when you were in your early years, somebody told you were not going to be ahead of year. So you made damn sure you took that criticism and you fueled it differently to go and progress. Now, 14 years later, you have this avalanche of criticism, self-doubt and everything, and you go, enough. Do you think motherhood? Do you think age? What do you think changed you in that respect?
I think I'm really easily wobbled. And I think that's a pattern. I think that's always been the case. So I love and I really take to heart any kind of comment from other people. So when I'm being built up and I'm being supported and I'm being nurtured, I absolutely thrive. And that's why my first head of department was so kind of pivotal in my career because she picked out my strengths. And it is so rare that happens. And it's an absolute crime how rare it is in management. But that's how you do it. You pick out someone's strengths and you build on them. And I'm a very kind of, I'm a person of extremes. So I'm either feeling really confident and really good at what I'm doing, and then just one thing can completely throw me. So I think if I'm really honest, what was really the turning point was how quickly, how I was, this sounds really kind of, I don't know what the word is.
Egocentric.
Yeah, egocentric. Thank you, Shav.
That's all right. English teacher.
Indulgent. But it was, if I'm really honest with myself, it was how people started to see me differently at work. And I felt embarrassed and I felt like I'd let loads of people down, kids, staff. But the main thing was that was in balance with, but look at the impact it's having on my family.
Yes.
It's just not worth it anymore. So that was it. So I was kind of dealing with like my own struggles professionally and how I was being regarded and all of that. But it was always, is the payoff worth it? Is the balance out? And at that point, the balance was completely thrown off.
So that was it. Done.
So that was it. And then, you know, as you know, we have a ridiculous timeline, don't we, in education of handing in notice and all of that, which again really limits people to what they can move on to. That's a real problem, that kind of having to give that term's notice. But anyway, so I joined I don't know if am I allowed to say where I was looking at jobs and stuff? Is that...
We're not the BBC, love. You can say what... Go on. It depends what you say. If you're going to say something like OnlyFans, I'm probably going to have to mute you out. I don't know where you were looking. Go on.
That was a turning point. No, it definitely was. I can't believe, if there was one thing I thought wouldn't crop up during this podcast, it'd be me and OnlyFans.
No worries. One of my float. So just, dear listeners, Giselle Wild has not been on OnlyFans. I'll explain to Sarah what it is after the podcast.
She's looking confused.
Yeah. But this one's aside, where were you looking for this?
I was looking at a brilliant website, not a website, a Facebook page called the Work From Home Hub UK.
Perfect.
Right. And the reason that I was looking on that is because it's just the one lady that runs it, and she just posts really good quality work from home jobs. And for me, so this is the big thing, right? For me to leave this career, which I've worked my backside off to get to, and I've genuinely loved, and I mean this, I always say I've loved 85% of my teaching career. So across 17 years, that's pretty good going, I think. And it was a massive, massive decision for me because it was my identity. It was my crutch when I needed it. It was my social circle. It was the reason I got up in the morning. Like, it was massive. So I knew my kind of line in the sand was that it had to have an element of working from home. Because also I'm turning 40 this year and I need to be able to wee when I need to. That's really important. But my partner again he's now head of school, and the boys are getting older, and actually it gets harder as a parent as they get older, I find, because they need to talk more. So I knew my line in the sand was a work from home job. So that's how I came across the Work From Home Hub. And there's nothing from pyramid schemes and stuff like that on there. It's just really good quality work from home jobs. And I saw the Breck job come up, and it was just dead weird. When you just feel like, I think that's the one. Like, I think that's the one. And I applied for it. And what really drew me to it was that you could apply in October, and they were going to do the interviews and stuff in October, but it was a January start. So that really fitted in with the ridiculous school notice period, because it's really unusual to have a January start for a job. So I applied for a couple of other things as well that I didn't hear back from. And then this was the first one that I got an interview for outside of teaching, and did it and got it.
Right.
That was it.
Love it. So tell us a little bit about the Breck Foundation. What's the backstory there, Giselle?
Well, it's just, I just feel like I've just landed on my feet massively. I feel so lucky. And obviously I've only been doing it a few months, but so the Breck Foundation is a charity that is set up in the name of a young man called Breck Bednar. I don't know if you remember the case. It was a really big case at the time. So in 2014, he was groomed and then murdered by his groomer. And it's quite an unusual story because his groomer was also a young man. And the foundation was set up by Breck's mum. So that's why we're called the Breck Foundation. And we go around and we educate and we empower kids to just be safer in the online space, basically. But, you know, using Breck's story as a real foundation for that, and as a real face to something that actually happened that we need to learn from. So that's the foundation as a whole. We're quite a small charity, small but mighty. So we're a team of 7. And then there's different strands to what we do. And my particular strand, so where I'm a project coordinator, my particular project is training and recruiting young ambassadors to represent the charity. So when I explain this to teachers, I think it blows their mind a little bit, because that is my sole role. That's it. That's what I do. So I work with lots of schools across Sussex, and I present to kids. So it's perfect because I go into schools for like an hour, 2 hours, and I interact with these amazing young people, but I can also leave at 12:30 and walk out and go home and do some admin and sort stuff out. So yeah, I just feel incredibly lucky. And do you know what? The first thing that my manager asked me, so firstly, I had a 2-month induction period, right? And when we were talking about timetables and stuff earlier, people just go, right, here's your timetable. Year 9 are coming in at 8:45. Off you go on Monday. But I had a 2-month induction period. And the first thing that my boss asked me was, how would you like to be managed? Like, what gets the best out of you? And I thought, I've never been asked that. And to her, that was just a completely standard question that she, you know, that's just ingrained in the ethos of the foundation. But that really stuck with me, because I thought, why aren't we asking people that? That's massive. How do we get the best out of people?
Hello, loyal listeners. We're not going to go full on Bob Geldof during Live Aid, but if you could give us some of your money, even pennies, to help us fund the amazing Pick Pony podcast, the link is in the episode notes below. It's called Buy Us a Coffee, and we really do appreciate your contributions. Thank you.
So yeah, sorry, I feel like I'm really rambling.
Not one bit, because what you've done there is you've brought something to a beautiful full circle, because you've talked very openly, very candidly about yourself, I think, and you've been incredibly self-reflective. Obviously, I've just warmed to you completely, and I know Sarah has. You know, you told me you needed a wee. We've invoked OnlyFans. What's not to love? And I feel that the end of it is such a powerful ending, because what you're doing, despite the fact that all of your stars aligned with what you wanted, this is what I want. I want to work from home. I can't believe I'm still working with young people, but you're working for such a wonderful foundation. And I am hoping our listeners will go on a bit of a deep dive about that, because of course, many of them are teachers themselves. Yeah. And obviously, if you've raised some awareness about that particular foundation on our podcast, all the better. And the Work From Home Hub as well. We're all about the shout outs for the right people.
Yeah.
So that brings us on, Mrs. And I hope you've remembered this. I'm going to ask you a sliding doors moment.
I do.
So, right, Giselle Wild, originally from La Francais. What's your sliding doors moment, love?
So I've thought, do you know what? I've thought really long and hard about this, because there's a lot of them, right? And there's things like, you know, I've never been able to attend my kids' assemblies, for example. And I took Dexter on a school trip the other day, and there's so many different things. I will have to say just a little tiny story. I know we're short on time, but again, this will make you laugh, because this is how ingrained teaching is in us, right? The day before I was due to start my new job, I was texting my new boss like a mad woman. And I was saying, is there anything you need me to prepare? Like, do I need to have anything ready for tomorrow? And she was like, no, like, you start tomorrow. That's when the job starts. And I thought, we're just trained to work before we start work, aren't we? So that was a bit of a realization. But I think, and I hope this qualifies as a sliding doors moment, but for me, so I live 3 minutes away from the school that I used to work at, and the school that I really loved working at. And I thought that would be really hard. But actually what it does is every day it makes me reflect with a real deep sense of relief that I don't have to do that anymore. But my kind of sliding doors moment was when I left that school. And I must have done something different to my other schools, because I think when I left my other schools, I got like a crusty cactus and a John Lewis voucher. But when I left that school, I got 3 car bootloads of stuff from kids. Presents, gifts, flowers, wine, lots of Prosecco. And I had to take home 3 car bootloads. And I remember closing the final bootload and just closing it, and just this absolute sense of relief, because in that boot is so much attachment and dependence, and you know, you're carrying so much from these kids that you're so invested in day to day. But I think what I really want to say to people is that it's okay to close that boot and to just leave it. Whether it's, you know, for temporary or whether it's forever, it's all right to just close that boot and to have that lifted off your shoulders. And I think, yeah, I mean, Frankie literally said the other day, Mummy, your new job has changed my life, because I'm there for him, and you know, breaks with him, and yes, it's a massive pay cut, but I'm saving about 600 quid in childcare, because I can do every school run. So it's been negligible, really. And, you know, yes, I don't get the holidays, but it's quieter in the school holidays because I'm working with schools. So I'm around and it's fine. And I'm not tired. Like I'm not crawling towards the holidays. And there's nothing in my inbox that can't wait until 9 o'clock the next day if it comes after 5:30. And this job, I absolutely love it. And it's just one role. And I think as teachers, we have a million things on our shoulders at all times. And I can just do this one job really well and then box it and be a mum and a partner. And that's massive. It's huge.
Wow. What an inspirational story, Giselle. What an absolute pleasure it has been to listen to your story. And I have absolutely no doubt that you're very humble in the way in which, you know, please don't let me ramble on. You've been utterly captivating. And you've had me on the edge of my seat so many times. And I'm so glad that the happy ending was there, and a remarkable sliding doors moment that's going to stay with me. That I love that. So, on behalf of Sarah Dunwood, myself, and all of our listeners, I would like to thank you so much for being what I consider a really memorable guest on the Pit Pony podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been perfect.
Hello, friend.
Hello.
What an episode. What a woman. Really, one of those where you almost stop realising you're hosting and just listen, really captivating. Enjoyed it so much. There's so much to unpick. So I'm going to start off with something, and I know it resonated with you massively. The impact of words. The impact of an individual's words on a teacher, a kid, a colleague, that can really impact you. Because am I right in thinking Giselle was told she was never going to make it as a head of year, and she took it as fuel, and then when she was criticised again, more tired, later on, different point in her life, it floored her. We do not really understand the impact of comments and words, do we? What are your thoughts, pal?
I said it in the episode. I know it drives people potty that I am slow to speak at times. Not when I'm on a soapbox. I'll word vomit then. But when I'm really thinking about what I want to say, I will pause. I will slow down, particularly if there is the remotest chance that my words could be misinterpreted or could land in such a way that the person receiving them takes something different from that. I don't think, certainly in my later adult years, I tend not to speak without thinking about how it impacts on people, because I've seen too many times people's words really impact, and either the person who's saying it is oblivious to it, or there's intent behind it. And obliviousness to a point I can excuse, but when there's intent, that's something different. Now, I think with Giselle, and I might be wrong, and I didn't ask her at the time, I think, if I remember rightly, the context of that, you're never going to be ahead of a year, was also framed within here in this building, because there's never going to be an opportunity for you. And I think that's why she accepted that, and then it fueled her. Okay, well, I'll go and do it somewhere else. I will find somewhere that will let me do that. But without that framing, and I think had it happened 10 years later, that would have landed very, very differently. Somebody telling you you're never going to be. And I go back to this, and I say it so many blimmin' times. You wouldn't say that to a kid, even if that was factually true. You're never going to be a brain surgeon, because you know in your heart as a teacher that potentially that child is never going to get the qualifications that they need to go on that pathway. But you always temper it. You always find a way to deliver that message in a way that doesn't destroy the person who's on the receiving end. And I think you're so right. And she said it, and you said it in the episode, that 14 years later, when she found herself in that critical situation for her, that it didn't fuel her at that point, that it did the complete opposite. Is it worth it? On balance, is it worth it? No, it's not. I'm out.
I've told you this time and time again. when I was head of year in Warrington, and I had a year 9 kid. So I was not only head of their year, but he was in my top set English. And he came to me and he said, I'm leaving. I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going Ashton on Mersey it's the Manchester United Football Academy. And I was like, seriously? Really? Why are you doing that? You're really clever. And I remember I had his parents come in, and I was really positioning myself going, what are you doing here? This kid's clever. And I always remember sitting opposite them and saying, do you know what? You need to really think about whether or not he needs to go to this football academy, because he could make a great PE teacher. And be like, no, he's got a talent. He's been spotted. And the kid I was talking to was Jesse Lingard, who ended up playing for England, Manchester United, can buy and sell me. And sometimes we have well-meaning conversations with staff and colleagues, and we try and protect them and we try and protect children. But who are we to say to people, there's nothing for you here, or And I think it's really important to be careful with our words, and to, tread lightly because you are stepping on my dreams kind of thing. I think I've just invoked Yeats, I think, at that point. Why the hell not?
I think it's fundamentally, though, to do with having an awareness yourself of how your words might land with people. And I'm not holding myself up as a paragon of virtue, because I know I've been short with people. I know that I've probably said things, I know I've said things that I've regretted afterwards. But when I do come to that point of regret, I go and make good. I always try to make good. And not with not with that kind of passive aggressive or diminishing, I didn't mean it that way, which puts it back on the person for the way they've received it. No, it was my words.
Yeah.
I was wrong. I'm genuinely very sorry.
I'm going to own it.
There's not enough of that.
No, there's not. Because actually what they then do is, I didn't mean it like that. You've misinterpreted it.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I caused you offence.
Yeah. What's the other one? The word intimidation and that. Anyway, we can go down that route forever. So she's really good, and she twists and turns in her journey. And I think what's really important, and the one thing I do want to pull out with her, because it has happened in the past, when you have those rogue years when your GCSE results dip or something's gone on. This was a highly experienced head of art. She was setting cover work coming out of her ears. She was doing all sorts of stuff. And then something happened, didn't it? Where her results took a real hit. And I think that's her done, wasn't it, really, to be fair?
Yeah, and I get it. I've this podcast transports me back in time every week. There was 2012 was the year where the English GCSE results were really hinky nationally, and it really hammered our school, the school that I was at the time. Obviously, because I was kind of exams and data, I'd seen the data the afternoon before. So I was basically, I had an email ready for the head of English to say, I know you're on holiday in France, but I need to get my head together with you, because I know this is not right, because I know what you do in your department. So this is so out of kilter. It was something like, fundamentally it worked out, because it was still the A star to C and all the rest of it. It worked out that from B grade downwards, everybody was about a grade or a grade and a half out of where genuinely we thought they should be. And it wasn't just our school. So there was actually something at the time where a lot of schools went, this isn't right. And of course, because it was large scale, the exam boards would not budge on it. And it really had an impact. we dealt with that in that school. Myself, the head of English, and interestingly, the chair of governors got involved. But such a supportive, like, little, is it a quorum when you've got a little group of 4, who basically went, right, let's go through the data, let's go through the kids' work, let's get the evidence, let's construct this properly. And there was not of a hint of a whisper of a question about that head of department's capacity, skill, about any question about,
let alone a blame.
Absolutely not. And actually, interestingly, when he left our school, which was probably about 5 years after that, he actually said, he talked about that in his speech, about being supported, about the work that me and those 2 other people did with him to support him at that point, and that was the model of how leaders lead and managers manage. And so it can be done. And there was nothing in that school. Actually, the school rallied around him because they felt the injustice of it because of the way we messaged about it. So I think going to Giselle, she talked about that almost overnight, that feeling that colleagues were looking at her, were pitying her, were thinking that she'd done something wrong, that she wasn't this great teacher that had been doing CPD and all the rest of it. And actually, that could have been very different had the senior leadership actually managed that in a day. I don't know how they managed it in the school. I know the school put a remark and an appeal in and all the rest of it. But being blunt, there needed to be a PR job there to support a colleague.
100%.
And that it goes to leadership and management yet again.
I mean, going back to that period of 2012, 13, 14, we knew what games were being played.
Oh, yeah.
They were about to come in and go, teachers want to be glad to be shut of this old style GCSE. Where, let's face it, it took a load of us about 4 years to understand what a 6 meant, and parents still don't get it. They still want it in old money. And it was so interesting to watch her slowly get knocked and knocked and knocked to the point where, she dealt with a traumatic birth situation. There was a whole host of things. And this is where we use this expression with children when they are in crisis. You build a team around the child. So why can't we build teams around teachers? And I think that's where we miss real tricks. And that's where our pit ponies, when we talk to them and we see how they're thriving outside of the classroom, there is always that hint of sadness that they could have been thriving within the classroom.
And I think that's really critical. And there hasn't been a pit pony that we've talked to where you and I afterwards haven't actually gone, what a loss to the profession. And when you listen to how Giselle talked, even when she was talking about that particular cohort's artwork and the fact that every single one of them did an individualized, very personal project to them. No, there was no generic, there was no homogenous, all do this or all do it in this style or whatever. It was, she is clearly so passionate about a subject. And even with that happening, talking about a 17-year teaching career, where I think she said 85% of it was brilliant, couldn't fault it, which is, and she said, which is not bad for a 17-year career, I don't think. She was still so passionate. She still clearly wants to work with children and impact children. But what a loss, again, of somebody with such energy and such clarity, not just about children, but also about the teams around her, cover work, getting the cover work right.
Crikey, we're in the world of AI. You know, there's so much I just wonder how schools are adapting and embracing the wonderful world.
I don't know, and I don't want to go there in terms of conversation because I don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
But my litmus test, Sarah, whenever we're talking to people, whether it's as Pit Pony guests or in our world, I have one question and one question only when I am speaking to somebody who's exited the classroom or thinking of exiting the classroom. Would I want you teaching my kids? That's it. Would I want you, with all your flaws, with all your faults, with all your experience, would I fundamentally have wanted my child in your classroom? Would they have felt safe, seen, nurtured and encouraged? And 9 times out of 10, this is where the real sadness comes in. We've had some Pit Pony experiences, and I know we've got some future episodes where children's behaviour is the problem. And I'm thinking of one episode in particular, which is going to be a great episode that we've got coming up. And 9 times out of 10, the issue is not the kids.
Yeah.
It's the staff, and that is the real sadness. But I think another great episode, my friend, another fantastic opportunity to share space. And I go back, let these be records that are captured historically of individual stories of teachers who've left. And that's why I think it's really important that our listeners, and it's not a bit of a plea in terms of marketing or anything like that, but start to share these. Our group is talked about a lot within staff rooms, a lot. You and I only have to go to events and weddings and social events, and people come up to us and go, oh my God, you'd be amazed, I've joined your group. Share the podcasts. Share individual episodes if they've spoken to you. Send them on WhatsApp messages. Signpost people, because our podcasts are resources. They are opportunities to listen, to resonate, to get the inspiration, but more than anything, to capture real moments of poignancy. That we have a body of people who've exited teaching and they shouldn't have done.
No.
They really. So on that rather sad note,
but happy note for the Breck Foundation,
100%.
who've got somebody deeply passionate and is putting that passion elsewhere now.
Finding ambassadors.
Yep.
Finding young people. She's bridged that gap between working with young people, still feeling as though she's making a huge difference, which she is. Go and Google the Breck Foundation. Go and find out what they're doing, particularly if you're still within a school.
Yeah.
And you think your young people would benefit from working with the likes of Giselle. I don't know if she's geographically limited or what's going on, but certainly she would be somebody who you could reach out to. I know she's on our Facebook group. She's commenting. She's a great person to get to know. So, my friend, okay, we draw this fantastic episode to a close. And where am I going to see you, Sarah?
T'other side.
100%. Au revoir, friend. Au revoir.
Oh.
Thanks for staying with us during another great episode of the Pit Pony podcast. And on behalf of myself, Sarah Dunwood, Mike Roberts at Making Digital Real, we wish you all the very best, and we'll see you soon. If you wish to contact me directly for a support session or a clarity call for your next steps, please find my link in the comments below. See you soon.